This is The Shift, Stories of Resistance and Resilience, a multi-platform conversation series produced and hosted by Travis Rivera, the professional storyteller. I believe that we must embrace the power of stories to create a more inclusive world. So this series aims to share perspectives, insights, and stories from professionals around the world about the role that resistance and resilience plays in our personal and professional lives. So, tune in, listen up, take notes, and recognize our shared humanity. This is The Shift. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Shift. This is now a multi-platform series. We already know that, but it's not a live conversation in terms of it being live streamed. My name is Travis Rivera. I am the CEO and founder of The Professional Storyteller, where I embrace the power of stories to create a more inclusive world. And I am super thrilled to be returning to The Shift after a bit of a pause to get myself together. And I couldn't think of a better person to kick off the return of interviewing folks for this series on resilience and resistance than the amazing, the incomparable Minda Harts. Minda is a highly sought after speaker. She delivers transformative. Hold up, you see the timer trying to get me. Hold on, let me reset this. There we go.
And you don't have to read all that, Mark.
I am. I always read the full bio. I always read the full thing. Okay, here we go. Minda is a highly sought after speaker who delivers transformative talks on self-advocacy, trust, courageous leadership. She has presented at major conferences and worked with Fortune 100 and 500 companies to create empowering workplace cultures. Minda is an assistant professor of public service at NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service and the founder of The Memo, LLC, a career development company. Her forthcoming book, Talk to Me Nice, focuses on restoring trust in the workplace, a critical issue in today's evolving work environment. Recognized for her impact, Minda was named LinkedIn's #1 top voice in the workplace in 2020 and one of Business Insider's top 100 people transforming businesses in 2022. She also hosts Secure the Seat, a weekly career podcast offering practical advice and inspiration for professionals navigating their careers. And she is my guest and someone I've come to deeply admire over the years. Minda, welcome to The Shift.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you, and welcome back. I'm excited to be on the season with you.
Whoop, whoop. Yes, Minda was on our first season when it was just a LinkedIn audio and it was not recorded and it was not redistributed. So we've kind of updated our framework a little bit here, Minda, since you last joined us.
I see. Upgrade.
Yes,
I love it.
hello. Let me upgrade you. So I have to ask you this, and I asked all the guests this question. I asked you this question last time you and I met. Who are you outside of the professional highlights I read in your bio?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's probably changed even since you asked me prior. But I would say I am a daughter, I am a friend, I am a lover, I am a fur baby mom, but I am a human.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I love that. And you're also a tiny human. We're both shorties.
Yes,
So
yes.
I would say we photograph tall. Ow. Um, Thank you for sharing that. And I also know that you are a proud fur mama, and so I am just thinking of your former dog who crossed a rainbow bridge, and I believe you have a new dog now. What's the new dog's name?
Yes, shout out to Boston who is watching over us
Yes,
as we talk. But the new baby is Roman. Well, he's my
Roman.
little Roman empire.
Love that. Love that. And me and Minda have for those watching the video, you'll see this. Me and Minda have a love of typewriters and that typography font. So Minda has quite a few typewriters actually in her collection. And I remember I saw something on Amazon and I like sent it to you I DM'd you and you're like, "Oh, I already have that." I was like, "Of course you would."
But I was so touched that you even remembered that about me, and it's actually,
Yes.
if I could reach it and grab it, I'd show it to you. But it's you can even see one of them behind me. But I
Yeah.
just love it so much.
Yeah, and one thing about me and I think this is why when 97% of your business or opportunities come from relationships that you develop over the years, you really try to remember people's lives and their stories. And I think the way my brain works, because I'm neurodivergent, is I remember things in stories. And so I'm not good at remembering people's names or names of certain things, but I remember the story. I remember the story behind, the certain things that you like, right? And so I knew we
Yeah.
had the typewriter love common. This is another question I ask every guest, which is a little bit different than the last time you were on the show, because the theme is different now. What is your personal concept of resistance and resilience?
Hmm. That's such a beautiful question.
Thank
And I would say I think about resilience a lot, but I also, in our current climate, think about resistance a lot. And I think that when I first started my advocacy, that happens to be in the workplace, I used to think that I couldn't be resistant because I had a 9 to 5, right? I had put this story on my own self that said that I can't be like those who are, marching out
you.
in the streets and what have you. But what I realized was two things can be true at the same time. Our advocacy and our resistance is self defined, right? And once I realized that I get to define what resistance and resiliency look like, I was able to create that for myself inside the workplace, right? Saying, okay, I've given X amount to this job. I've been resilient. So honoring the path that I was already on, and then saying, how can I resist some of the things that in the systems inside the workplace that are not helping inside or outside the workplace? And so I was able to redefine what resistance looked like. And part of that was through my voice, right? Leveraging the power of self advocacy is a form of resistance, right? Letting people know what good looks like to you. And so I'm realizing that in some way, shape, or form, I was always doing that, but because I was trying to compare someone else's
Yeah.
resiliency and resistance to my own, but realizing that that is a personal thing, and I just us showing up today is a form of resistance.
Yeah. And I think, and this is what I tell people all the time, every day I choose to be myself in a world that tells me I should not be alive, in a world that has been trying to strip me of my humanity
Yep.
for decades, in a world that is literally out to kill me as a gender nonconforming, queer man of color who's feminine and disabled, right? And I say every day that I choose to be myself is a daily decision. Authenticity is a daily decision. And to me, my authenticity is a form of resistance
Yes.
because I am resisting the patriarchal notion of what a man is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
I am resisting the notion that disabled people have to be desexualized. I am resisting the notion that queerness is only acceptable if it's within these confines of acceptability politics or respectability politics, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
resisting what a Latino man is supposed to be and look like and act like, right? And that to me is my form of resistance. And the resilient aspect is surviving each and every day when something has tried to break my spirit.
Listen, and we're better for it,
Yeah.
Mark, that you're living it and choosing that. Like you said, it's a choice. We all have a choice, and you are helping set other people free. So thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Thank you for those kind words. I have to ask you this because I feel like we were talking about this pre-interview, I think, about
Yeah.
my therapist told me decrease your news intake, increase your mindfulness practice. And you and I were talking about how we're both kind of like news junkies and news nerds. And, we seem to be more polarized as a nation more now than ever before, at least in our lifetimes, because, we're still young.
Mhm.
Um, and there is a heightened level of distrust in our communities,
Mhm.
our workplaces, even our places of worship. And this ties to your new book, your forthcoming book. How do we begin to repair and restore trust among our community when, especially with the people who willingly voted for someone who said he would do what he is doing now?
Yeah, that's a hard one.
I was gonna say that's not an easy question, Minda. Sorry, I came out the past swinging.
You did. I'm like, wait a second. Where's
Woo!
my water, Mark? But yeah, I have to say this. A lot of people will say to me, Minda, can trust really be restored, regardless of the situation? And the answer is yes. I believe that trust can be restored because if we can break something, we can fix something, but trust takes work, right? And that takes a consistent demonstration um, to enhance it. It's an action and a verb. And to be honest, I don't think that a lot of people want to be self aware enough, want to do the work enough to always restore the trust. But I think part of it is acknowledging where we are. We can't solve for something that we won't even acknowledge, right?
Yeah.
I will say this. I have someone I know, I've known for many years, and we don't have the same political views. And they voted for the current administration that we currently have. And it was months before I was able to actually have a conversation with them because I just couldn't understand and didn't want to understand. And we recently had a conversation, and it gets to the answer. And I said, "Are you ready to finally be honest? You want to finally be transparent? Is this what you signed up for?" Right? Because we can't even restore our relationship till we acknowledge and are transparent about the current climate. And if we don't both see that, then I don't think that you're willing to do the work to restore this relationship, right? And we had a very honest conversation, Mark, and they admitted that this isn't what they thought.
Yeah.
And from that moment, it showed me, okay, I had mistrust, I had an erosion of trust with you, but maybe there's a glimmer of hope that we can restore this relationship when we're both on the same page, right? But if one of us is saying that it's the sky is yellow and one of us is saying the sky is blue, we're not going to enhance trust. And that also shows me what I need to know is you're not somebody that can be in my life. This isn't a workplace that I can grow in. This isn't a place of worship I can worship in, right? Because my safety is hanging in the balance. And I think that even if we're not able to restore it, we can restore it within ourselves because we can make a choice. It goes back to the choices, right? We're not forced to have to stay in a situation. Now, we may not be able to leave right away, but
Right.
we still have the power of choice to say, to honor our values, to honor our goals, to honor our humanity. And I do believe that trust has to start with transparency. And if we're not able to even start there, then there's no work that can be done toward it. But
Yeah.
that's not a bad thing because that also informs us of our next decision.
Yeah, and I think and me and Yvonne Austin, who I believe you know,
Mm-hmm.
the founder and chief architect at Indelible Impressions Consulting, who happens to be a dear friend of mine and a sister in Christ. And she and I had a conversation shortly after the election. And it was one of our, we tend to have these like phone calls where she's doing a short road trip and I'm cleaning the house because I like to clean while I talk on the phone because it helps the mundane feel less mundane. And she likes to talk to me on the phone when she's able to focus on our conversation and not be pulled into different meetings. And so that's kind of like how we developed our connection and we do it that way. And so we were having a conversation shortly after the election results and we were just like, oh my goodness, it's become us versus them. It's we can't have these people in our lives. We can't talk to them. We can't love them, and no one's above getting grace. Like they can't get grace and forgiveness and all these things, and that's just not the politic that I subscribe to, right? And I think you're alluding to that in the sense that if a person is willing to acknowledge that they were bamboozled, that they got caught up in the hype,
Yeah.
or that they saw economic stability as more of a priority than our human rights, right?
Mm-hmm.
Over our democracy. If they can acknowledge that their vote was selfish in nature and has had negative repercussions on all of us, but even on their economic motivation, right? The thing that motivated them to vote for this man is
Yeah.
now being sabotaged, right? And so it's like it's an interesting time, but what me and Yvonne were getting to is that none of us are without our flaws and our mistakes, and no one is above not not, everyone deserves to receive grace. And so for
Mm-hmm.
me, you mentioned something really really important is the recognition, the awareness
Mm-hmm.
of harm caused.
Yep.
Because I have a MAGA aunt who
Mm-hmm.
I grew up loving deeply and admiring her, and she has become a shell of herself to the point where I don't recognize her. But what I will not do is allow this cult mentality that has taken over her stop me from recognizing our shared humanity.
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
I love that so much, Mark, because I remember shortly after the election, I made a statement on one of the social platforms, and I said, I'm disappointed, right? All of the things, but I also want to understand the why behind it. So at some point, I hope that we can come to the table and talk so you can understand how this is impacting me and I want to understand, right? And I had another influencer bash me and drag me for and use their followers to drag me too, to say we're not there yet, we're not doing that. And it's like, wait a second, I understand the sentiment to some degree, but how do we fight power? We can't fight it by our
Right,
own doing, right? And
right,
if we can sit down and say, okay, let's have a conversation, I want to better understand what's going on, what's your mentality, and let you understand mine and see, okay, actually what you wanted is what I wanted, some, not all, right? But you didn't understand exactly how that was going to get rolled out, right? Or you
right.
only had, I grew up in a house where my parents had one issue. That one issue, they might not have agreed with everything else, but as long as they always voted Republican up until a certain time in their life because of one particular issue, right? But did that mean that I throw them out? I remember when I grew up in a Republican household and I voted the first time I could vote. I think I was voting for John Kerry or something like
Oh,
that.
well, that's a very
and
consequential
and
election.
that was a controversial, right? And my
Yeah,
parents were like, we had this like back and forth, like, you're not a Christian if you're voting Democrat. And I'm like, you know what? I love y'all, but I got to do what I got to do, right? And later in life, they apologized because they were in a box, right? They didn't understand. And then eventually, you know, they were like, okay, now I'm voting Democratic, right? Because we had a conversation, right? They thought I had mistrust. I definitely didn't trust them at that point, but there was a reconciliation. And I do believe that in some cases, we have to have space for that, right?
yeah.
That's where the
I mean,
trust is possible, maybe.
Absolutely. I think, I think that there are people, for example, I know that I'm very queer, but
Mm-hmm.
my politics is not as progressive or far left as some people might think, right? So, like, I'm not a abolitionist. I don't believe that we need to abolish the police. I think we need to reform the police. I
Mm-hmm.
think that we need to have alternative community mental health support systems in place in lieu of calling 911. I think we need prison reform. I think that we need to overturn these convictions of people who were, smoking weed or selling weed when now a bunch of white people are making millions of dollars off of it legally in certain parts of the country, right? And so there are things where I am a little more moderate, I think, than some of my other friends,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm way more left than some of my other friends or family members. And what I know to be true is that if we pause for a second, and if I were to go to the middle of America and sit down with a farmer
Mm-hmm.
who is white, maybe around my age, maybe a little older, and we got to talk to each other, on the surface, you would think we have nothing in common. But the reason why my mission as a professional storyteller is to embrace the power of stories to create a more inclusive world is because I know, like through your book, through your own storytelling, that stories allow us to see ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and get a window of understanding into a lived experience that is different than our own.
Yeah.
And when we take the time to actually hear each other's stories, to read each other's stories, to listen to each other, not to demean or dehumanize or put down, but actually listen to understand, that is where our shared humanity will reveal itself. And
Yeah.
that is going to be the thing that saves our country.
Well said. I totally and full heartedly agree. Going back to the conversation I had with a peer of mine who, sees himself as a Republican. Um, One of the things that once we got to talking and having a conversation, we both said, you know what, there are some people, even on my side, that I don't agree with, right? How they're handling themselves in the
Yeah.
media these days and vice versa. And we got to have like this really sweet conversation that neither one of us probably thought we could have with each other, right?
Yeah.
And we both were frustrated about some of the same things, 6 months later, right?
Yeah.
And so I think to your point, what brings us together is the human side of it. People who
Yeah.
might hear, oh, she wrote a book about, my first book, The Memo. somebody passing by it who isn't a woman of color or, a marginalized community may say that book isn't for me, but when they hear me tell my story, that resonates, right?
Yeah.
It hits different, right?
Yeah.
And so I think
Yeah.
those are the spaces where trust can still have room to breathe and grow.
That's where trust blooms.
Mm-hmm.
In the
Yep.
moments when we dare to have conversations with each other, actively listen,
Mm-hmm.
pause on our judgment, right? And not shame folks.
Yeah.
Because what I know to be true, the reason why I've had the success I've had in my career is because it's not that they agree with everything I say, but it's how I say it,
Absolutely.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you just need a certain messenger. And sometimes I'm not the messenger. Listen, I was not a messenger for an organization, and I was like, "Peace out, I'm out. Y'all got me up," right? And so, and I always say it, and this is a hill I will die on. The most dangerous person in America is not the middle of America farmer who's in his 50s and 60s, who's conservative and Christian and homophobic. The most dangerous person in America is the white woman who is college educated, so called Democratic leaning, feminist, who is only willing to hold on to those kind of values when her power is not threatened.
But even in making that statement, Mark, is it takes a lot of self-awareness for somebody to say, is that me? Right?
Mm,
Is that me? Right? Because we don't want to have those hard looks in the mirror to
yeah,
say, whoa, could that be me? Right? And not take offense to that, to say, wait a second, I don't want that to be me. Right? Yeah,
right.
I might be a white woman living in the suburbs and soccer mom, but is my decision making, is that impacting other people who don't have the same background and upbringing and means and resources as me? I don't want to be that, right? Or if
Right.
I am a black woman who goes to church every Sunday, and the moment maybe even your pastor says something that is damaging to another um, identity,
Yeah.
do we keep supporting that, or do we say, what, that's no longer meets my values, right?
Yeah.
am
It's
i
no longer
am I
value.
part, right? And I think we all have to say to ourselves, is that me? And
Right.
how do I be like the best version of myself? Because every decision that we make, we have to ask ourselves two questions. Is this going to enhance trust with
Mm,
the group that I want to uh, engage with, or is it going to erode trust, right?
yeah.
So me voting for this on the ballot, is that going to enhance trust with my black peers or my queer peers, or millennials, or is this, or the policies that I'm creating in HR, is this going to be good for the better of the company, or is this going to marginalize people even further? We have to really take a step back and
Yeah.
ask ourselves those two questions, because oftentimes trust is eroded not intentionally but unintentionally. And I think if we're a little more aware of things, then we could say, you know what, I didn't mean to do that, but here's my choice and I can rectify that. But
Yeah.
if we're continuing to do that,
And I think that's a great point. I think that's what
yeah.
a lot of Latinos need to do right now. It's a little bit different because I'm Puerto Rican, and so as U.S. we've been U.S. since the 1800s, since the Jones Act, and so when we talk about the Latinx experience outside of immigration, right, often talk about Puerto Ricans,
Yeah.
right? But so much of Latinidad in the U.S. politics and in the media is through the lens of immigration, and
Mm-hmm.
so it leaves me and my people in this weird like gray zone.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm thinking about what's happening right now with the man who was wrongfully deported
Mm-hmm.
to El Salvador, and he lives in Maryland. I'm forgetting the pronunciation of his last name. Kabar, I believe, is his last name. And he was a legal resident of the U.S. And the Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration needs to facilitate his return,
Mm-hmm.
right? And now they're dragging their feet because you know what he did, this
Right.
man does, right? And there's a whole bunch of Venezuelans on social media, Venezuelans who voted for Trump in Florida, who said, I can't believe he's doing this. This is not why I voted for him. I want him to get rid of the criminal, undocumented folks, not the crimeless, undocumented folks, right? And
Mm-hmm.
but what they didn't realize was simply existing as an undocumented person in this country makes, in the eyes of Trump and his administration, makes them criminals.
Mm-hmm.
right? And some might say, well, they're breaking the law, right? But there's different layers to law breaking. There's like felony and there's misdemeanors, right? And you wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
handle a misdemeanor offense with the same severity that you're handling a felony offense, right? And so I think that people want to be the party of law and order until you get to the nuance of things, right?
Yeah.
And then, I saw a video where this small business owner, white man, was saying how messed up it was that people were applauding the fact that he had to shut down his business, or that people are struggling, those who voted for Trump are struggling because of Trump's policies. And here's the thing for me, it's not right to do that. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
stand by that, right?
Yeah.
But I need them to understand that the reason why we're not giving you sympathy and the reason why we're not as empathetic is because we told y'all this would happen.
Mm-hmm.
But y'all thought your whiteness would protect you. And whiteness has never been enough, which is why immigrant communities from Ireland, when they came to the US, Italians, they are a protected class in the state of New York, Italians, because they were so discriminated against,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it's like whiteness alone will not protect you. It's
Yeah.
never been a race issue in America. It's always been about class, right? And now those white folks who voted for him are finding out that if you're a white but not part of their class, your needs are not a priority for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now you're in that season of I effed up and now I found out. Right. And I don't feel bad because we had
Yeah.
so many people across social media, across the news media outlets. We had people like Kamala and other folks warning us that Project 2025 was not fan fiction. It
Mm-hmm.
was literally the blueprint for what he's doing. And he's implementing it with such a fever, with such ferociousness that I'm dizzy. I think most of us are dizzy. And this leads to my next question because I know we're short on time and I want to get your perspective on this. How are you navigating these times as an entrepreneur? And what advice do you have for women of color in particular? Because I think about the book that launched your career, The Memo, which I believe is becoming a film, TV.
Yes. Yes. Film.
Yeah,
We're.
I follow you on social media.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
of course, and so talk to me a little bit about how you're navigating these times as an entrepreneur and what advice, if you had to give people a memo for today, what memo would you give to women of color in particular about how to navigate these times?
Yeah, we're having a time. We're having a time. I mean, I have to say this. I am an optimist by nature, and I do believe the advice I'm gonna give to everybody is our best days are still ahead of us.
Mm,
I truly believe that, but that requires a sense of self resolve, the
mm,
resilience, right? Understanding what part in this puzzle do we play. So, I do a lot of speaking at companies and corporations. And even though I'm not a DEI consultant, some of the money that companies would bring me in for, money might come out of that pot, right? And so earlier this year, it was a struggle. I'll be honest and very transparent. I had different contracts cancel, talks canceled because of the fear around having inclusive conversations. And it was hitting me in a way that I knew at some point would probably come, but I didn't want to acknowledge that it was happening at the speed in which it was. And so I was worried about what my work might look like, what my peers' work might look like, what this undoing of humanity, dignity, and respect in the workplace could look like. And so I was fearful, right? I didn't know what that looked like. But what I do know, like I'm going to use your phrase, what I know to be true is that we all want a country we can be proud of. We
yeah,
all want a safe space that when we go to the grocery store, we don't have to wonder, is it okay to shop here? Right? Or a hotel that you check into. And so, what I will say is, I've decided I'm going to continue to do the work I've been doing. And the people, Khalees had a song, Milkshakes Brings the Boys to the Yard. Your work will bring the people to the yard, the people who need that milkshake that you have to offer. Right? And so, for me, even though maybe I'm not speaking as much as I once was in a month, the right clients, the right companies who are still invested in making the workplace work for everybody, they're still on that path. And I'm
yeah,
working side by side with those people. And there still are those companies out there. So don't think everything is doom and gloom. It's
right,
real, but everything's not doom and gloom. So I would say continue to. Another thing you said, Mark, was the delivery. I don't care what we call it. If we call it DEI, if we call it culture and humanity, whatever that is, as long as people are creating safety for people to do their best work, that's what matters to me. So don't get caught up on semantics, get caught up in the demonstration. Are they
Yeah.
doing what they're saying, even if it's behind the scenes? Because we know
Yeah.
tons of companies who are saying things and not doing those things behind the scenes. So the
Yeah.
proof is in the pudding. And so remember just to make the main thing the main thing. And together is where our success can catapult. So this
Yeah.
isn't, you're not alone. And keep showing up to, here to the shift and, others who are doing the work. When you feel those moments where you want to slide down the wall, we're
Yeah.
still here, we're still fighting, we're still resilient, and we're still resisting.
Absolutely, Minda. Well said. And I will say, because I also had lost opportunities, and but when I designed my company as a professional storyteller, I've been doing this now for what is this, year 16? I started kind of young, y'all. Year 16. And I think about in 2020 when George Floyd's murder happened and all these things, I knew that this momentum that was coming up, the bubbling, was going to
Mm-hmm.
burst. I rationed it to the real estate market in Miami, right,
Mm-hmm.
or the housing market. I knew that there was bubble, it was things were bubbling, it was going to eventually explode. So in
Yeah.
2023, 2 years ago, this is the start of year 3 of my business full time. I knew that when I designed my company, I designed it with the different pillars and in such a way that no one can ever pigeonhole me into one thing.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest struggle is people forget that I do so many different things because I do so many different things, right? Like they forget that I'm a choreographer. They forget that I'm a marketer by
Yep.
training. They forget that I'm a writer or a speaker, or sometimes, they forget that I do coaching. And so, because I do so much. But the through line of all that I do, Minda, is I tell stories and I embrace the power of stories to create a more inclusive world, right?
Yep.
And so I designed a company that is able to weather this current political and social climate. Whereas colleagues and friends of ours have been struggling,
Mm-hmm.
my business has been taking off in year 3,
Yeah, that's
right? And that's
wonderful.
a privilege. And
Yeah.
so what am I doing with that privilege? I'm making sure that every dollar that I have to spend on my business is within the communities I belong to.
Yep.
If you're not BIPOC, if you're not LGBTQ, if you're not disabled, if you're not gender not conforming and one of the different identities that I hold, then you're not going to be prioritized or getting that potential
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to work with my company.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not discrimination.
Yeah.
That is me choosing, right, in this capitalist world we live in, like this free market, how I spend my dollars,
Absolutely.
right? It means I'm not going to Target anymore
Mm-hmm.
for certain things that I used to go to Target for. Now I go to the Black mother and daughter owned boutique down the street from my house and get some fly ass outfits. And yeah, I'm paying a little bit more, but you know what? At least I know that my dollars are going to my people, my communities.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because the only way we're going to survive the next, I can't believe it's only been, what, 100 days? Not even. The only way we're going to survive the rest of this shit show that is Trump's second term is if we commit more than ever before to be in community, for
Mm-hmm.
community, by community. And if we don't stop and take a second to listen to our shared humanity and recognize our shared humanity, we will not weather this well.
That's right. Yeah.
Minda, the last question I have to ask you in the closing remarks, in the closing minutes we have left together is, what do you hope to shift in society through your work?
Yeah. That's a great question. I hope that the shift that takes place is that we are making decisions each and every day that enhances trust versus erodes trust. That is a choice. And if we make trust the foundation, then so many more people get to benefit from a more safe and environment they can belong in.
I have to ask you this. What are some ways that people can repair trust?
That's a good thing. Definitely go get my book when it comes out in July.
Talk to
Talk
me
to me
nice.
nice. Okay, but it's just a first step. Listen, it doesn't take much. We all have access to this, and that's what does trust look like for you,
Mm,
right? Or has there been a time that I've eroded trust with you, and what do I need to do to repair that?
yeah.
That's a lot of us don't want to hear the answer to that, right? And it's just those simple acts of humanity to say, Yeah, there was that time, right? And some of us even know that time, but we don't want to acknowledge what that time was. But
Listen, I do enough therapy. I can acknowledge it. Like I have eroded trust with folks. I have made
hmm
mistakes. And you know what? That doesn't make me an evil person. It makes me a human, right?
yep.
And the difference between our current president and someone like me who makes a mistake is that I have the ability, right, and the awareness to acknowledge the harm that I've caused, and
hmm
I'm not a self-absorbed narcissist, right? And so it's hard to repair trust when you think the whole world revolves around you and you can do no wrong, right?
Yeah.
And so y'all, Minda alluded to this, but she also has other books like The Memo, Right Within, and she has her Secure the Seat, which is her podcast, and she has this new book coming out, forthcoming book, Talk to Me Nice, which I'm super super excited to dig into. And you also have, I'm forgetting the title of the book you wrote for young women of color.
oh yes, you are more than magic.
You Are More Than Magic. I actually bought that for my niece. It was
Thank
one
you
of the
so
gifts I
much.
gave her, of course, and she really loved it. She's an Afro Latina, and she just loved all the things about that particular book. And and so I just want to say, more now than ever, the first step to repairing trust is acknowledging that you broke the trust,
hmm
and how will you get it right the next
Yeah.
time?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it takes time, right? And so, but listen, thank you, Mark, for having me. Thank you for the work that you do,
Thank you.
and I know that this conversation is going to shift a lot of thoughts and hearts and minds. So, thank you for allowing me to be part of it.
Thank you for always saying yes to me. I never take that for granted. People always say, "Oh, how many followers do you have on social media?" I was like, "Honey, who's in my Rolodex? Who can I lean on and call on that when I call or email or text or message, they actually reply because they actually like who I am and what I do." So I never take that for granted. Time is the one currency we can't get back, Minda. So thank you so much for spending some time with me today. We'll be sure to drop her link to her website, her books, her podcast, and all things Minda Harts on the show notes. You're tuning into The Shift, Stories of Resistance and Resilience. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and rate this podcast or vodcast if you're watching us on YouTube. And be sure to share this with the people in your life, especially those who may have voted for Trump and want to learn how to repair some trust, because we gave you some insights today. Thank you all so much for being here. Be well.